Right? We need to think systemically about this, and we need to do it in ways which use every iota of our research capacity. So now, when we look at data of urban districts, we see that by the 4th grade, now Baltimore does not participate in this, and it needs to. Right? By the 4th grade, students in District of Columbia are already a year and a half behind students in Charlotte, New York, Boston, and Austin, and Houston. This data is wonderful for scholars because our role at the university, if we have the single most important role, is to instill doubt in people who are too sure. That's a scholar's role. We used to argue about textbooks, that the thing that makes the biggest difference is textbooks. Very heated math wars, science wars. No evidence at all that any of them make any difference, despite all the NSF involvement and pain over this particular issue. It turns out, when you look at the high-performing districts versus the low-performing ones, there are big and startling differences that account for massive differences in achievement. All the top districts 8 to 10 years ago moved to a single curriculum, and they tried to organize their professional supports, induction programs, professional development around implementing a curriculum. In Austin, it was a very progressive NSF-funded set of materials. In Houston, it was the polar opposite. What mattered is that the curriculum materials reflected ambient community values. Right? That's what mattered enormously. Who were the beneficiaries of going to a common curriculum? The poorest children, because poor kids move every year. In Chicago, when we went, and Arnie, if he's here yet, right, our Secretary of Education, we went and took the leadership team around to their schools. We saw the school making the decision about what it wanted to use, and every grade level used something different. In the first school we went to, for the math folks here, the 2nd graders were using everyday math. The 3rd graders were using flashcards. The 4th graders were using Saxon, and the 5th graders were using investigations. If any of us could have survived that, it would be a miracle. Systemic, coherent programs matter for the most vulnerable children that we're serving. Those are the big differences, not the particulars of professional development or the particulars of curriculum textbooks. Okay. Second big issue, the quality of the information the leaders had for managing. Several years ago, Penny Noyce and I, at the Noyce Foundation, tried to identify for a group of universities the most effective strategies for supporting teachers. We did a Delphi process. We hired people to go out and create a vetting process. We found 8 different approaches of all different stripes. We invited their leaders in to the foundation and asked them for the single best site in the United States so that we could measure with reasonable comfort, accuracy, what a superintendent can expect from adopting the strategy. We hired some people with no dog in the race, University of Chicago statisticians, and sent them out to these sites. In not one site did they have the data capacity to answer the most rudimentary questions about effectiveness. Right? They were flying largely blind. Most of the high-performing districts built systems to address, at least at a course level, put in performance management systems, structural systems that link student data to teacher data, so you can actually measure whether your approaches are really working. And we have to invest in that stuff as much as we invest in the particulars of a strategy for working with teachers. So what's the next problem to take on? Well, it turns out that the highest performing districts are plateauing in performance. Charlotte-Mecklenburg, which saw extraordinary gains, is basically flat. New York is flat. Boston is decreasing a little. Right? Why is that? The last wave of reform was focused exclusively on raising the bottom. We went in these places from teaching kids nothing to teaching them something. And that brings exhilarating gains on state tests. The next stage is moving from teaching something to teaching them a lot. That's going to require fundamentally different kinds of systemic strategies than just getting everyone taught something. So what are the things that I think need to be done that take advantage of some extraordinary opportunities? First, look at today's youth. 42,000 elite college seniors applied for Teach for America last year. 39,000 28 to 35-year-olds applied to become teachers through the New Teacher Project. 8% of Caltech's senior class, about 10% of Princeton, Dartmouth, Harvard's senior class. I don't know the data here, but I bet it's high, very high. They only take 1 out of 8 as all the capacity they have to bring those students into teaching. We need to build vehicles that bring those students who care about social problems into the work, into our teacher education programs. Most higher ed teacher education programs set low bars and wait for students to come. What did we do? In 1997, my dean came to us. We had only 7 math majors getting secondary certified. My wonderful dean, Mary Ann Rankin, said, we got to fix this. We're getting a lot of pressure. We're getting a lot of requests from the state. Well, we built something called UTeach. Took an afternoon to design this after speaking with freshmen. And it turned out that Elaine Seymour's beautiful book talking about leaving, Why Women Leave Engineering, was the key. Mathematicians always go to the tables in the back of the books before we read the book. And in the tables in the back of the book, there's studies of 13 colleges, and she found that 1/3 of all math and science majors were interested in teaching as a second or third choice, and mostly pointed to an individual teacher who inspired them. So we got the idea. We saw Teach for America. We saw these other efforts. Why not build an honors program for freshmen and recruit them to an honors math program that would keep teaching open? If they won't come in at 2.5, I bet they'd come in if the GPA was 3.5. Right? Show you the data here. This is 2007. We went from 7 math majors to 153. Now it's close to 200. Half our math majors are getting secondary certified. We built an honors program that asks them to do public service to children and keep that interest open. And we said, make an informed choice by spending every semester in schools working in different ways. The effect is that 92% of all the UTeach students are still teaching, and that more than 80% of them after 5 years are teaching. It's incredibly expensive for school districts to have teacher turnover. Catherine Clark and other economists have shown how extraordinarily expensive it is. By allowing students to make informed choices and honoring good choices that they're making, the students know what they're getting into, and when they go in there, they stay. What are the 2 reasons UTeach teachers leave? Pregnancy is number 1. That's about half the loss, right? Of course, future gain. And the other is continuing education, going back for advanced degrees in what? Education. Right. UTeach is still a round-off error. It produces about 100 math and science majors a year now, 120, compared to thousands of Teach for America and UTeach. But if all our institutions did this, we would make an extraordinary contribution to the state of Maryland. Right. Because these students know their math and science. Now next, we have to think about the way we work with schools in completely different ways. And to do this, we have to not drink our own Kool-Aid. Working to strengthen public education is much harder than I ever imagined. So here's some of the studies that just give you an inkling of what the real challenge is.